As summer is in full swing, you're either ready to show off the hard work you did to get your body beach ready, or regretting that you spent more time at the fridge than the gym this winter. It's a little late for crash diets. A juice cleanse won't help you now. But maybe summer's the perfect time to get healthy in some deeper ways. What might it mean to leave some toxic situations? What might it mean to cut out some toxic people? To remove some toxic relationships? To abandon some toxic habits? Let's pursue some ancient wisdom. Let's find a better way. Let's let the Holy Spirit do a work in us. Let's settle in for detox, a deep cleanse for your soul.
Well, it is summertime, which means fun in the sun, right? And we're kind of at that point in the summer where we're kind of punting on getting ready for summer, if that means diets and all of those things. We've just kind of settled in and be like, maybe next year, right? Like next year we're going to get it. It's going to be different, right? Because we're already in the middle of summer and it's a little late now in the game. Because every so often you have those reminders, maybe you're not quite ready for beach season just yet. A few years ago, now mind you, we've lived in the middle of the country for the last 10 years, right? So like to get to an ocean is not exactly an easy thing. And so a few years back, we were going to be going to the beach for the first time in several years. And I began to get very self-conscious because I had put on a few extra pounds since the last time I had taken my shirt off in public. And so I was kind of sweating going to the beach a little bit. And thankfully for my fragile ego, though, just a few minutes into the trip, we hadn't been at the beach long, and I suddenly realized that day I was not going to be the chubbiest nor the hairiest guy at the beach. And so suddenly I felt somewhat better, right? And why is that? Right? Because we live in a world that is fueled by comparison, right? Like we're constantly measuring ourselves against the people around us. And so seeing that gentleman in his swim trunks and homegrown sweater vest in the sand, that might have been, I don't know. That didn't make me any thinner. It didn't make me any healthier. It didn't change anything about my situation or how self-conscious I was feeling. But all of a sudden, it was better. Because even if things weren't how I wished they were or how I thought they should be, I was at least doing better than that guy, right? And so anybody who's on the beach is going to look at me and go, oh, and then they're going to see him and go, ooh. And so suddenly, I feel better by comparison, right? Like that's just how our world wires us. This world of comparison, which is why most studies indicate that the majority of people, at least at some point or another in their life, struggle with their appreciation for their body image or their weight gain, that it's on the majority of people's radar at some point in their life, if not consistently throughout their life. And when you start to look around at our world and our culture, it makes sense because we are surrounded and bombarded by photoshopped and surgically altered imagery all day, every day, in every way imaginable. Just this week, I saw someone post a side-by-side of a well-known celebrity. And one picture was her at 29, and the other picture was her at 73. And someone said, "How is this possible?" Well, Photoshop, plastic surgery. Like, there's lots of ways it's possible, but natural stuff isn't one of them, right? And so everything about our culture fuels this comparative mindset. And that's why there's more fad diets than you can shake a stick at. The reality is, though, despite all the cleanses and all the crash diets, we're not getting any healthier. Because all the cleanses and all the crash diets, they have one thing in common. They promise you dramatic results and sometimes deliver dramatic results. But they are overwhelmingly short-lived results. One study indicated that 2/3 of people who pursue a crash diet gain all of the weight back in a very short amount of time. In fact, another study says that people who pursue weight loss regain 100% of their weight. 95% of people regain 100% of the weight they lose within 5 years. And you start back over. I don't know if they're factoring in those of us who go on a diet, lose weight, gain weight, and lose it like 2 or 3. I've lost the same 20 pounds like half a dozen times. I just keep finding it again. And then I have to lose it again, right? Like that's just the way the cycle goes. But we keep trying. So much so that one study indicated that the average adult American, I don't know who they're talking to because I feel like I would lower this average a bit, but maybe I already have lowered the average a bit with my 0, and that should scare us because it skews the average that much higher. But the study said that on average, an American adult pursues 4 crash diets annually. 4 attempts to quickly lose a set amount of weight. But as you might imagine, if you're pursuing 4 crash diets a year, few people stick with it for more than a short space of time, and in just a few weeks, it's over, and then they begin to chase the next one. What's worse than the success rate of all the crash diets are the side effects of what happens when the crash diets crash. Because most of the time, they work and promise results by tricking your body. Right? They mess with the way that your body is designed to function, and so they convince your body to break down other sources of nutrients that you have consumed, which oftentimes can lead to health problems as your body starts to attack its own muscle mass and bone density, trying to fill the void of what's missing. You can imagine over time the stress that puts on your systems as your vital organs try to compensate for that, especially in an ever-ending cycle. But perhaps the biggest challenge of the crash diet craze is it lowers your body's metabolism because it convinces your brain that your body is starving. And so your body says, okay, well, then I need to go into like conservation mode. And so it slows your metabolism down, which means as soon as you return to normal, it makes it that much harder to keep off the weight you've worked so hard to lose, right? Like this is just body chemistry stuff. You didn't know you're getting a physiology lesson this morning, right? Like that's kind of a bonus. So if we know all of those things, we know crash diets don't work. We know the results might be really big, but they're going to be short-lived. We know they're fueled by things outside of us, this notion that we're trying to measure up. So if we know all of those things, why do we keep going back to it? Why are people trying on average 4 a year? It's because of that comparison game that we play. Right? We look around and we say, I may not be where I should be. I may not be where I want to be, but I'm doing better than that guy. I'm at least doing better than somebody. I'm at least trying. And so we keep trying, and we keep failing. And it would be foolish of us to think that there is not a parallel that exists for us in the realm of our spiritual health. That we don't do something very similar at times when it comes to our spiritual formation. We will chase quick fixes. We will chase after fad spiritual practices. We will devour the latest bestseller from our favorite TV preacher or megachurch pastor, and there's nothing wrong with people in either one of those camps. That's not a statement knocking those folks. It's just saying we'll go out and buy the book, and this time it's going to be different because I finally found the secret. The only trouble is it doesn't work. And the quick fixes lead to dramatic results that are really short-lived. You have probably experienced, if you've been trying to follow Jesus very long, you've experienced that. Something happens, you get all jazzed up. Yes, I'm going to win the world for Jesus. I'm going to eradicate sin from my life. And then you fast forward a couple weeks or a couple months and you go, yeah, I know, I'll try that again later. It didn't go so well. And we fall into this pattern of chasing the quick fix, chasing the fad spiritual practice, convinced that this time will be different, convinced this time is going to stick. But it doesn't take very long before we find ourselves falling back into old rhythms, falling back into old habits, falling back into the things that made us unhealthy in the first place. Because if you really want to get healthy and you really want to lose weight, you don't chase a fad diet. You don't chase the latest quick fix. You start to change some things foundationally in your practices, your habits, the boundaries you set on what you consume. And if we want to pursue spiritual health, we're going to have to apply a similar approach. We're going to spend the next few weeks walking through the highlights of the book of Proverbs. And through the course of this series, we're going to look into the book of Proverbs and see if we can't identify some of those healthy habits and practices, some of those healthy boundaries that guide our thinking so that we're not chasing quick fixes to what's wrong with our spirit, what's wrong in our souls, but that we're trying to correct course and pursue something a little deeper. That's why we're calling this series Detox, a deep cleanse for our soul. Because the stuff that is out of alignment with God's best in us doesn't get taken care of by chasing a crash spiritual diet or reading the next great book. It happens when we begin to let the Spirit do a deeper work in us. So we're going to dig into the book of Proverbs, and we're going to chase some ancient wisdom to see what it can teach us about those things. But before we get started, we have to recognize that we can't treat the book of Proverbs like a fad diet, even though it lends itself that way. Right? Like reading the book of Proverbs, you can quickly come away going, oh, I know all the answers to everything now. I just do this. Right? Like the way the book is structured, the way that this material is presented lends itself to think that way. And so we need to spend a few minutes before we dig into the book of Proverbs understanding how the book of Proverbs works. Because if we don't understand how the book of Proverbs works, we're just going to slap it in the category of a fad diet. We're going to change some stuff really quick, and then we're going to get really frustrated when it either doesn't work or the results don't last. And so we're going to spend a few minutes here kind of laying some groundwork for how the book of Proverbs works. The book of Proverbs is part of what we would call wisdom literature. In the Old Testament, there are a group of books that are poetic in their structure. And sometimes we call all of those wisdom literature. Everything from Psalms through the Song of Songs. Particularly, however, the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job fit the bill for what the ancient world called wisdom literature. They parallel what we see in the world around Israel. And so there's some things we have to understand about the way wisdom literature works if we're not going to treat Proverbs like a fad diet. Okay? The first one, we'll have these on the screen. They're there in the YouVersion app if you're using that to take notes and fill in the blanks. The first one is that ancient wisdom literature is universal in scope. But Israel's wisdom is grounded in their covenant relationship with God. Okay, that's the key difference between the wisdom we find in the Old Testament and the wisdom we find in the rest of the ancient world. Wisdom in the Old Testament and the rest of the ancient world is really, really broad. It's like good advice for everybody, no matter what your faith is. That's how wisdom works. It is universal in scope. But what the book of Proverbs is going to do consistently is to ground that wisdom in a covenant relationship with God. So wisdom in the ancient world is really generic. And so there are sayings in other cultures around Israel that sound exactly like the book of Proverbs. Like we could play a fun little game, is this Proverbs or is this something else? And most of the time we'd probably get about half of them wrong. Because wisdom works that way. It's the stuff that everybody goes, oh yeah, that makes sense. In fact, part of the book of Proverbs closely parallels an Egyptian piece of wisdom literature. It's called the wisdom, let me get this right because I don't want to mess his name up because that would be rude. Amenemope. Okay? The wisdom of Amenemope. I know y'all are having a grandkid soon, right? Like put that in the hopper for baby names. Amenemope. Anyway, so
My son will have a divorce before he has.
anyway, I'll leave it. Y'all work that out. Anyway, so the wisdom of Amenemope parallels a section of what we find in the book of Proverbs, because this wisdom is pretty universal. But what the Old Testament does in Proverbs consistently is to ground it in the concepts of the Torah and mitzvah, the law and the commands. And so it says we're gonna approach wisdom from the perspective of what it means to live in a relationship, a covenant relationship with Yahweh our God. So there's no fatalism to the book of Proverbs. It's wisdom applied in a relationship to God. Second thing we have to understand about the way wisdom literature works is that wisdom literature is often more observation than prescription. It's more observation than it is prescription. And this is key because this is what flips the script from not treating Proverbs like a fad diet. Okay? Wisdom literature tends to describe how the world works rather than a how-to manual to live in the world. It's observational. It's not prescriptive. It's more about the way things tend to be, not the way things always are. Okay, perfect example of this to kind of drive home what we're talking about here. We often hear Proverbs 22:6 quoted. Some of you probably know it. If you don't recognize the verse, you'll know it probably when I say it. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, somebody finish it. He will not depart from it. How many times have you seen that not be true? Where someone is raised on the ways and words of Jesus. They're raised to chase the right things, a right relationship with God, only to come into adulthood and abandon that faith. So what happened? Did the book of Proverbs lie to us? Did their parents fail? Is this the old switcheroo? Well, they thought they were training them up right, but they really didn't mean it. Did God somehow fail? Was he unable to live up to that promise? No. That's just not how Proverbs works. It's observational. If you instill early in a child good and right things, they should pursue that all of their lives. But there's no guarantee that they will. Because wisdom literature doesn't work that way. It's observational. It's not prescriptive. It's telling us how the world tends to be. Which brings us to the last point here. And this is important because it's the payoff of what we've been saying. Wisdom literature is concerned with lived morality. There's not a lot of deep doctrine in the book of Proverbs. This is lived morality stuff, on the ground application, earthy kind of wisdom. Wisdom literature is concerned with lived morality, but Proverbs are principles, not promises. Dr. Keith Drury, who's a longtime professor and author in our Wesleyan tribe, I heard him remark on more than one occasion, I love the book of Proverbs because Proverbs are like bumper stickers. Sometimes they're true. And I think that's a good thing, a good principle to bear in mind as we try to think, what does it mean for these things to be principles, but not promises? Because if we treat them like promises and we come to Proverbs 22:6 and we have children who are raised in the admonition of the Lord who abandon their faith, we have to go, well, I guess the whole thing just didn't work. Or they're principles, not promises. Which means they're rooted in how things should work when we're living in a relationship with God. It's how the world should unfold if we're pursuing righteousness. But there's this incredible little thing called free will. Sometimes it's ours, sometimes it's other people's, that can enter into a situation that is otherwise good and foul things up. And so Proverbs have to be understood as principles rather than promises. As we go through, we'll see more how these kind of rules of wisdom literature apply for us. How they sound like very abstract, earthy. Oh yeah, everybody could agree with that. But Proverbs comes alongside and says, yes, but we've got to understand it in covenant relationship with God. We're going to see how these things play themselves out as we dig into the book of Proverbs. And hopefully, having these kind of ground rules in mind will help us not treat the book of Proverbs like a fad spiritual diet, where we go, oh, right here, I've got my verse, that's all I need to know. I'm going to live it out. And then we go, well, wait, nothing really changed. It's because there's a deeper work that goes past chasing the fad. So with all of that said, let's step into the book of Proverbs together this morning. It's kind of a long lead up of introduction. But we want to put some things before us in terms of some things to keep in mind for the series as a whole. And let's step into the book of Proverbs. We're going to begin, as you might expect, in Proverbs chapter 1. In fact, we're going to begin with Proverbs 1, verse 1. So if you're using YouVersion, you can pull that up. It'll be there in the app. Tap on a device, open a Bible, follow along on the screen. Let's hear the word of God together in Proverbs chapter 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Now listen to this list. This is what the book is for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. So the book opens with kind of a nod to King Solomon, the son of David, the wisest of Israel's kings. If you're familiar with his story, when he becomes king, the Lord comes to Solomon in a dream and says, ask me for anything and it is yours. The Old Testament tells us that Solomon, instead of asking for wealth or land or power, asked the Lord to give him wisdom that he might lead his people well. And so in response to that, the Lord blesses him with wisdom along with wealth and riches and power and all the things that go with it. And Solomon leads Israel as a kingdom into kind of a golden age internationally. He becomes renowned for his wisdom worldwide. And the Old Testament tells us of people flocking to Jerusalem to be in his presence, to hear his wisdom. Now, what we have to make note of is the book of Proverbs is going to make clear as we go along that it's not saying in this opening word that everything we're about to read comes from Solomon's pen. The Old Testament itself tells us in other places that Solomon had a tendency to gather wisdom. He wanted to collect parables, or not parables, Proverbs rather. And so what we find in the book of Proverbs is a collection of Israel's wisdom in the traditions of Solomon. If you want to be wise like Solomon, here's what you need to do. Surround yourself with wisdom the way that Solomon did. Because Proverbs itself at different times is going to tell us the following chapter. There weren't chapters originally, but that's a whole discussion for another time. But the following material comes from this wise person. Okay, so clearly that's not Solomon's, but it's in the book that is collecting the wisdom in the tradition of Solomon. Okay, so the book of Proverbs unfolds in a way that says, if you want to be wise, adhere to what you find in this book. But right out of the gate, it tells us it's not just for people who are already wise. It says this book is designed for the young, the naive. At one point, it even says the simple. We kind of clean it up in translation a little bit because we don't want to be like, if you're stupid, read Proverbs. But that's kind of the sense, right? Like, it's not just for people who are already wise. It's for people who want wisdom. It begins with this: everybody should listen to this. No matter how smart you think you are, no matter how wise you think you are, no matter how much you think you have it together, there's some stuff here that's going to be of help. So Proverbs begins with this lofty promise that it's going to show us how to attain wisdom and discipline and understanding and insight and prudence and justice and judgment. And we go, wow, this is good. This is like the best infomercial ever, right? You're cruising at 3 a.m. and you're like, wait, what? I can lose 100 pounds by tomorrow if I just drink 3 cups of this stuff? It's like you're on the phone, like, I need 4, like Proverbs sets us up to expect a fad diet, right? Let's do this stuff, apply this stuff, everything's perfect. That's why we tend to read it that way. But again, let's go back to the thing. Principles, not promises, all that stuff we were just talking about. The book opens with this section, this kind of primer at the beginning that is bookended on the front and back ends by a pair of words. It's one of the structures that makes Hebrew poetry work, and we see it right here out of the gate in Proverbs, where an idea, a word, a phrase is going to be included at the beginning and end of a section to kind of tell us it all goes together. This is one unit. It's telling you one truth. Okay, there might be multiple truths bound up in that, but it's telling you one thing. And here in the opening 7 verses of Proverbs, those catchwords are a pair of words: wisdom and discipline. We see it in verse 2 and we see it in verse 7. So verse 1 is kind of the superscript. Hey, this has to do with Solomon. And then we get into this, the next 6 verses, kind of our preamble to the book of Proverbs. And they're housed in this kind of bracketed section talking about wisdom and discipline. Well, we've already spent some time talking about wisdom. We kind of have at least some vague idea what that is. But this other term that gets used here for instruction or discipline is a bit more nuanced. Throughout the Old Testament, the prophets use this language to talk about judgment a lot, to talk about the punishment for Israel's sin. So in Isaiah 53, the passage that we kind of quote at Christmas time, or rather, I guess at Easter time, about the suffering of the servant, and I lost the words, that he was bruised for our iniquities, and the punishment, that's our word. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his stripes we were healed. So Isaiah is using that famously there in that passage to talk about punishment. That's the context here. And Proverbs is going to use the word that way. It often is going to be set in parallel with words like rebuke, correction, discipline. So it kind of carries this weight of judgment, but it also often gets paired with wisdom as we find it here. And there's this interesting thing. It's probably not interesting to most people. It's one of those nerdy moments. Okay, it's kind of cool because when these words show up together, they kind of govern what each one means. So they mean more together than they do apart, right? Kind of like peanut butter and jelly, right? Like, we know what peanut butter is, we know what jelly is, and we know what a peanut butter and jelly is, right? Like, it's kind of the way that words work. And oftentimes when we see these two words together, they're informing us as to how we should understand each other, each of them. And they kind of mean more together than they do apart. And so Proverbs is setting us up to say, look, this isn't just about wisdom. It's not just about getting smarter. There's also a place for discipline and instruction, which often carries this weight of wisdom being passed from one source to another. Often, Proverbs houses it in terms of one generation to the next, a father to a son, parents to their children. And so Proverbs wants to get us thinking down this road to say wisdom and discipline together isn't just about getting smarter, it's about getting better. It's about opening ourselves up to some rebuke, some correction, some reproach, some examination in terms of wisdom and instruction that helps us better understand things. And so as we make our way into the book of Proverbs, and we think about it in terms of how do we avoid treating it like a fad diet, like a juice cleanse? How do we get to a point where we are pursuing a detox, this deeper cleanse of our soul? I would put it like this for us. In a world obsessed with quick fixes and shortcuts to success, wisdom and discipline offer the slow road to spiritual transformation. Right? Fad diets are a thing because we live in a world that is obsessed with the quick fix and shortcuts to success. Do the easy thing today and your life will be dramatically different tomorrow. And no matter how many times we fall for that, it just doesn't work. And so in a world that is wired for, is obsessed with quick fixes and shortcuts to success, wisdom and discipline offer the slow road to spiritual transformation. This opening section of the book of Proverbs closes with what many scholars call the motto of the book. We're going to see these words pop up from time to time if we were to read straight through the book of Proverbs. We find them there in verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And we're reminded of the way that Israel's wisdom is pursued differently than that of their neighbors, that it's grounded in this covenant relationship with the Lord, Yahweh, the God who has entered into a fellowship and a relationship with his people. Because these things that Proverbs promises us, knowledge, wisdom, insight, prudence, justice, judgment, righteousness, all those things are only as good as the foundation on which they stand. Wisdom, discernment, shrewdness, prudence, all those things, in the hands of wicked people, those things become tools for self-promotion. They become tools for the advancement of one at the cost of the whole. Right? These things are not inherently righteous. We, in fact, develop different words to describe them. If somebody says, oh, he's a shrewd businessman, or he's a really wise businessman, which guy do you want to hang out with? But the words kind of mean the same thing, especially in the way Proverbs uses them. And so we differentiate our language because we understand, wait, this concept of being wise and sharp and being able to see through all of the mirage can either be a really good thing that makes you a benefit to the people around you, or it can be the thing that makes you go, I see what nobody else sees, so I can get ahead of the line. These ideas, these principles are only as good as the foundation on which they're built. In the hands of wicked people, they become tools for self-promotion. But in the spirit of the fear of the Lord, in the spirit of the ways and words of Jesus, wisdom, discipline, prudence, shrewdness, all of these things become tools for the redemption of all that sin seeks to destroy. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. These things are only as good as the foundation on which they're built. Which is why, as we're going to begin seeing next week, as we start working our way through the book of Proverbs, and this will be a relatively short series. We'll only have a few weeks together, so we're really just going to hit the highlights. But what we're going to see unfolding in the book of Proverbs is that it describes for us two paths that are available. On the one hand, there is the path of wisdom. On the other hand, there is the path of folly. And Proverbs will tell us the path of folly promises to be a shortcut. It promises to get you to all the things you think you want quicker and easier than the path of wisdom. Proverbs readily acknowledges we have choices about the way in which we're going to live, the way in which we're going to apply our morality. And it says, yes, there is a path that seems like a shortcut to everything you want, but it shuns the fear of the Lord. And so its promises come up empty. On a long enough timeline, the path of folly leaves you empty, leaves you right back where you started. But Proverbs is going to insist that there is another way. There is a slower way, which we don't like. But there is a slower way that is a better way. Proverbs would tell us again and again that in a world that is obsessed with quick fixes, shortcuts to success, that it's wisdom and discipline couched in the fear of the Lord, built on a foundation of this relationship with a holy God, those are the things that will offer us the slow road to spiritual transformation. Invite the band to come back. Over the next few weeks, we're going to do this quick tour of the book of Proverbs. And we're going to look into some of the toxic stuff that keeps us chasing quick fixes. Right? Some of that stuff that clogs up our spiritual health, that gets us chasing these quick fixes that seem easier than a detox, than letting the Holy Spirit do a deep cleanse to our souls. We're going to look at some of these toxic things that keep us chasing the quick fixes, because aren't you tired? Aren't you tired of putting in the work only to see it come to nothing? Aren't you tired of convincing yourself one more time, this one's going to be different, I'm really going to take it seriously, I'm really going to dig in, I'm really going to settle on what God wants me to do? Aren't you tired of being frustrated when you don't get results, or the results you get are so short-lived that you end up right back where you began? The reality is we can chase all kinds of fixes for our marriage, for our family, for our job, for our relationship, for our church, for our kids. We can do that. We can spend a lot of time chasing lots of fixes, convincing ourselves this time is going to be different. But until something happens at a deeper level, we're going to fall right back into the old habits, right back into the old patterns, the old rhythms that got us where we were in the first place. So here's my invitation to us as we do this quick tour of the book of Proverbs. Let's open our hearts. Let's open our minds, open our ears, and listen for the Holy Spirit. That He could draw us into a path of wisdom, a path of instruction, so that we can be transformed. Let's pray together.